My wife laughed the day I lost my job. She thought I had lost my future, but she had no idea that the decision I made years earlier would soon become the one thing her company could not move forward without. I still remember the sound of that conversation because it was the moment everything changed. My name is Daniel Carter, and for 15 years, I built my career around solving problems that most people never noticed. I was never the person who needed attention in a room. I preferred results over recognition, preparation over appearances, and long-term success over quick praise. But after a major company restructuring, I walked into my office one morning and learned that my position no longer existed. I packed my belongings into a small cardboard box, said goodbye to people I had worked with for years, and drove home wondering what my next chapter would look like. Losing my job was not easy. A career is more than a paycheck. It becomes part of your identity, your routine, and the way you see your place in the world. I knew I had experience, skills, and knowledge, but in that moment, all anyone could see was that I was unemployed. When I arrived home, I expected my wife, Emily Carter, to understand that this was a difficult moment. I thought she would remind me that one setback did not define my entire life. Instead, she looked at me with surprise and then laughed softly. "Daniel, maybe this is a sign that you need to be realistic," she said. "You have spent years working behind the scenes. Maybe it is time to accept that things did not turn out the way you wanted." Her words stayed with me, not because they were cruel, but because they came from the person whose opinion mattered most. Emily was successful in her own career. She was a respected executive at a growing technology company, and I was proud of everything she had achieved. But over time, we had started measuring success differently. She believed success was visible. It was a title, a corner office, and a position people recognized. I believed success was built quietly through knowledge, trust, and the ability to solve difficult challenges. That difference had never caused a serious problem before. But now, standing in our kitchen with a box of my belongings still in my hands, I realized she saw me differently. She saw someone who had fallen behind. I saw someone standing at the beginning of a new opportunity. I did not argue with her. I did not try to prove my worth in that moment. I simply walked into my home office, closed the door, and started reviewing everything I had learned throughout my career. I remembered the projects I had helped create, the systems I had designed, and the relationships I had built with people across the industry. What Emily did not know was that my previous role was only one part of my story. Years earlier, I had been involved in developing a process that several companies still depended on today. I never talked about it because I never wanted recognition for something that belonged to a larger team. But the world had a way of bringing hidden value back into the light. The next morning, while I was considering my future, my phone rang. The name on the screen surprised me. It was someone I never expected to hear from after losing my job. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but one sentence changed everything. "Daniel, we need your signature before we can continue." At that moment, I realized something Emily did not know. Losing my position did not mean losing my value. In fact, the one thing everyone thought I had lost was about to reveal the importance I had carried all along. The phone call lasted only a few minutes, but I knew immediately that something important had changed. The person on the other end was Michael Reynolds, the chief executive officer of a technology company that had worked with my previous employer for years. His voice was calm, but I could tell there was urgency behind his words. He explained that his company was preparing for a major transition and had discovered a problem connected to a process I helped develop several years earlier. They had searched through old records, reviewed previous agreements, and found my name attached to a critical part of the project. "Daniel, we need your approval before we can move forward," Michael said. "Your signature is the final step." I sat quietly after the call ended, thinking about how different life could look from one day to the next. Just 24 hours earlier, I was sitting at my kitchen table feeling uncertain about my future. Now, a major company was reaching out because of the experience I had built over 15 years. But I did not feel excited because I wanted to prove Emily wrong. I felt something much deeper. I felt reminded that a person's value does not disappear when a job title does. The next morning, I prepared for a meeting with Michael and his leadership team. I reviewed the documents carefully and looked back at the work I had done years before. The process they needed was not something I created alone. It came from collaboration between many talented people. That was why I never talked about it as my achievement. I believe good work was rarely created by one person. It was created by people who trusted each other and shared a common goal. When I arrived at the company headquarters, I noticed the difference immediately. The building was impressive, the offices were modern, and everyone moved with confidence. This was the type of environment Emily respected. It represented the success she understood. As I walked through the building, I thought about our conversation the night before. I wondered if she would see things differently if she knew why I had been called there. But I decided not to rush that conversation. I wanted the truth to come through actions, not explanations. Inside the conference room, Michael introduced me to his leadership team. Some executives recognized my name, while others looked uncertain. They knew I was no longer with my previous company, and they seemed curious about why my involvement still mattered. Michael explained the situation. He told them that the system they depended on today was built on decisions made years earlier, and my knowledge of those decisions could help them move forward with confidence. The room became quiet. I answered their questions, explained the details, and listened carefully to their concerns. I did not walk in trying to impress anyone. I simply focused on helping them understand the situation clearly. By the end of the meeting, the atmosphere had changed. The executives who were unsure at the beginning were now asking for my recommendations. They realized I was not just someone connected to an old project. I was someone who understood why it worked and how it could continue improving. That evening, when I returned home, Emily noticed something was different. She asked about my day, and for the first time since I lost my job, I saw curiosity in her expression instead of doubt. I told her I had received a call from Michael Reynolds and explained the situation. She listened carefully, but she did not say much. I could see that she was processing information that did not match the story she had created in her mind. She had thought losing my job meant losing my importance. She had not realized that my career was built on something much stronger than a title. The days following my meeting with Michael Reynolds changed the way people looked at my situation, but more importantly, they changed the way I looked at myself. For the first time since losing my job, I stopped thinking about what I had lost and started remembering everything I had built. A position could disappear overnight, but experience, knowledge, and trust were things nobody could take away. Michael invited me back to continue helping his company understand the challenges connected to the old system. I agreed because I believed in finishing what I started, but I also wanted to understand why a company with so many resources needed someone like me. During our next meeting, Michael explained that the company had grown quickly over the years. They had talented employees, advanced technology, and strong leadership, but growth had created complications they had not expected. Different teams had started making decisions based on their own priorities, and the original purpose behind the system had become unclear. I listened carefully as the executives explained their concerns. I recognized the situation because I had seen similar problems throughout my career. Companies often believe they need more resources when what they really need is better alignment. The challenge is not always finding something new. Sometimes it is remembering what already worked. I spent several days reviewing their information and speaking with different departments. I noticed that many employees were working hard and genuinely wanted the company to succeed. The issue was not effort. The issue was that people were moving in different directions without realizing it. I prepared a detailed analysis and presented my recommendations to Michael and his leadership team. I explained that the company did not need to completely replace its existing system. It needed to reconnect the people using it with the original goals behind it. I suggested improvements in communication, clearer responsibilities, and a more organized process for making decisions. The executives asked thoughtful questions, and I appreciated that they were willing to listen. I never believed expertise meant having all the answers. True expertise meant knowing how to find better answers together. As the meeting continued, I noticed something interesting. The same people who initially looked uncertain about me were now taking notes and asking for my opinion. They were no longer seeing me as someone from the past. They were seeing me as someone who could help shape the future. When I returned home that evening, Emily was waiting in the living room. She had been following the conversations about Michael's company and wanted to know more. She admitted that she had searched my name online and looked into the projects I had worked on throughout my career. She told me she had never realized how much responsibility I had carried behind the scenes. I listened quietly because I knew this was difficult for her to admit. Emily was not someone who easily changed her opinions. She had built her own success by being confident and making quick decisions. But now she was seeing a side of my career she had never taken the time to understand. She asked me why I had never told her about the impact of my previous work. I told her the truth. I never wanted my accomplishments to become a reason for comparison between us. I wanted her to support me because she believed in me, not because she discovered that other people valued me. That answer surprised her. She realized that while she had been measuring my success through titles and positions, I had been measuring mine through purpose and contribution. The next morning, Michael called again. He had one more request. He wanted me to attend an important company meeting because there was one final decision that required my involvement. I looked at my calendar and understood something. This was no longer about proving that I was not a failure. It was about showing that a person's value is never defined by the moment when others stop recognizing it. The morning of the final company meeting arrived with a different feeling than the first time I walked into Michael Reynolds' office. Before, I was someone they contacted because they needed answers. Now, I was someone they trusted to help guide an important decision. The difference was not because I had changed. I was still the same person who preferred careful planning over attention and meaningful results over recognition. The difference was that people were finally seeing what had always been there. When I entered the conference room, I noticed that the atmosphere had changed. The executives who once looked uncertain were now welcoming and prepared to listen. Michael greeted me warmly and explained that the company had reviewed my recommendations from the previous meetings. The improvements we discussed had already helped different teams communicate more effectively, but there was still one major decision remaining. The company needed to finalize a long-term agreement connected to the system I had helped develop years earlier. My signature was required because I was one of the people who understood the original structure and the responsibilities connected to it. I looked around the room and thought about how unexpected the moment was. A few days earlier, I had been sitting at home wondering what my next career move would be. Now, I was sitting with executives who were asking for my guidance. But I did not feel the need to celebrate someone else's mistake. I did not want anyone to feel embarrassed for doubting me. I simply wanted to do the work correctly. During the meeting, I explained every detail carefully. I answered questions, reviewed possible outcomes, and made sure everyone understood the decision they were making. Michael appreciated that I was not trying to take control of the room. I was there to create clarity, not to receive attention. After several hours of discussion, the leadership team reached an agreement. They thanked me for helping them avoid a decision that could have created unnecessary complications in the future. Michael shook my hand and told me that my patience and professionalism were exactly what the company needed. When I returned home that evening, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table. She looked different. The confidence she always carried was still there, but now there was also reflection. She asked me how the meeting went, and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. Then she quietly admitted something I did not expect to hear. She said that when I lost my job, she thought she was watching someone lose his direction. But now she understood that she had only been seeing one small part of my story. She had judged the moment without understanding the years behind it. I told her that I understood why she reacted that way. Losing a job can make anyone question their future. But what mattered was not the setback itself. What mattered was how a person responded afterward. Emily looked at me and said she wished she had supported me instead of laughing at my situation. She admitted that she had focused so much on appearances that she missed the qualities that made me valuable. That conversation meant more to me than any professional recognition, because success was never only about what happened at work. It was also about the people who stand beside you when things become uncertain. The next day, Michael sent me a message with an unexpected offer. He wanted me to become a long-term advisor for the company. I read the message and smiled. Not because I had finally proven everyone wrong, but because I realized something important. Sometimes losing one thing opens the door to discovering what was truly yours all along. The offer from Michael Reynolds changed my professional path in ways I never expected, but the most surprising part was not the opportunity itself. It was realizing that the qualities people often overlook are sometimes the same qualities that create the greatest results. I had spent years building my career quietly, solving problems, supporting teams, and creating systems that helped others succeed. I never needed everyone to know my name. I only needed my work to have meaning. Becoming a long-term advisor for Michael's company was a new challenge. It meant stepping into a larger role where my decisions could influence important projects and future plans. But I approached it the same way I had approached everything before. I listened first, asked questions, and focused on understanding the people involved. Michael appreciated that approach because he had seen many professionals arrive with confidence but leave without creating real improvement. He told me that experience was valuable, but humility was what allowed experience to make a difference. Over the next few months, I worked closely with different teams throughout the company. I helped leaders understand how small changes in communication could create better results. I encouraged employees to share their ideas and reminded managers that the best solutions often came from the people closest to the challenges. Slowly, the company continued to improve. The biggest changes were not always visible from the outside. They were found in better conversations, stronger teamwork, and people feeling more connected to the purpose behind their work. One afternoon, Michael invited me to a leadership event where several executives and employees gathered to discuss the company's future. Before the meeting began, he introduced me to a group of leaders and shared how my perspective had helped the organization move forward. I listened as he described the impact of the changes, but I felt uncomfortable receiving too much attention. I had never wanted to become the center of the story. I only wanted to help people find better solutions. Later that evening, Emily and I talked about the event. She told me that she had watched the way people interacted with me and realized something important. She said she had always believed success was something people displayed through titles, achievements, and public recognition. But she had started to understand that some of the most valuable people were not always the loudest voices in the room. I appreciated her honesty because I knew changing a belief built over many years was not easy. I told her that I also learned something from everything that happened. I learned that even when people misunderstand you, it is important not to let their opinions change the way you see yourself. A person who knows their own value does not need to constantly prove it. Emily asked me if I had ever been angry when she laughed after I lost my job. I thought about the question carefully before answering. I told her that I was hurt because I expected support, but I was never interested in making her feel guilty forever. People make mistakes when they only see part of a situation. What matters is whether they are willing to learn when they understand more. That conversation brought a new level of honesty into our marriage. We stopped focusing on who was right and started focusing on what we could learn from each other. A few weeks later, Michael asked me to join a new project that would expand the company's operations. As I looked over the details, I realized how different my life felt compared to the day I carried that cardboard box home. Back then, I thought I was losing a career. I later discovered I was creating a new beginning. The most important lesson was not that I found another opportunity after losing my job. It was that my value had never depended on a position. It had always been built through the knowledge, dedication, and integrity I carried with me wherever I went. The new project with Michael Reynolds became one of the most meaningful chapters of my career, but it also taught me something unexpected about success. For years, I believed that working hard and creating value was enough. I never thought much about recognition because I was always focused on the next challenge. But after everything that happened, I realized that success is not only about what you accomplish. It is also about the people who understand and appreciate the journey behind those accomplishments. As the project moved forward, I continued working with Michael's company and its leadership team. We focused on building a stronger foundation for future growth. The company had already made progress, but now the goal was to create a culture where people felt confident sharing ideas and solving problems together. I spent time meeting with different departments, listening to employees, and learning about their experiences. I discovered that many people had valuable ideas but hesitated to share them because they believed their opinions would not make a difference. I explained to the leaders that great organizations do not only depend on talented executives. They depend on every person feeling connected to the mission. When people believe their work matters, they bring more creativity and commitment to what they do. Michael agreed with that philosophy, and together we worked on creating an environment where communication became one of the company's strongest advantages. One afternoon, Michael and I sat in his office discussing the future. He told me something I would remember for a long time. He said that when he first contacted me, he expected technical knowledge and professional experience. What he did not expect was the ability to bring people together. I appreciated his words, but I also reminded him that leadership was never about one person. The best results happen when people work together towards something meaningful. When I arrived home that evening, Emily and I continued our conversation about everything that had changed. She told me that she had been thinking about the day I lost my job and how differently she viewed that moment now. She admitted that she had been too focused on the visible signs of success. She saw a job title disappear and assumed my future had disappeared with it. She did not understand that a career is built from years of experience, relationships, and lessons that remain valuable even when circumstances change. I told her that losing my job was difficult, but it also forced me to remember who I was beyond a position. Sometimes life removes something familiar because it creates space for something better. Emily smiled and said she wished she had understood that sooner. I told her that what mattered was not changing the past. What mattered was building a better future together. Our relationship felt different after that conversation. There was more honesty, more respect, and more appreciation for the paths we had each taken. We stopped comparing our achievements and started celebrating them. A few months later, Michael invited me to speak at a company event about leadership and adapting to change. Standing in front of the employees, I thought about the person I had been on the day I lost my job. I remembered the uncertainty, the disappointment, and the feeling that everything had changed. But I also remembered the lesson that came afterward. A setback does not erase your experience. A difficult moment does not define your entire story. Sometimes the moments that feel like endings are actually opportunities to discover a new direction. Looking back, I understood that the greatest change was not that a company needed my signature. The greatest change was that I finally understood my own worth, even before anyone else recognized it. The months that followed brought a kind of peace I had not experienced in a long time. My life was no longer defined by the question of what I had lost. Instead, I was focused on what I was building. Working with Michael Reynolds and his team continued to challenge me, but it also reminded me why I had chosen this path years earlier. I never wanted success only for the recognition that came with it. I wanted to create solutions, help people, and leave things better than I found them. One morning, Michael invited me to a leadership meeting where the company was reviewing its progress. The executives discussed the improvements they had made and the lessons they had learned throughout the process. Several leaders shared stories about how communication between departments had improved and how employees felt more comfortable sharing ideas. As I listened, I realized something important. The biggest achievement was not the business results. It was the change in the way people worked together. Numbers could show growth, but they could not always show trust, confidence, and connection. After the meeting, one of the executives approached me. He told me that before I joined the company, he believed the biggest challenges required complicated solutions. He admitted that he had overlooked the importance of listening and understanding people. I appreciated his honesty because it reflected something I had learned many years before. Sometimes the answer is not hidden in more information. Sometimes it is hidden in the conversations people avoid having. That afternoon, Michael and I discussed the future of the company. He asked me how I planned to continue contributing as an advisor. I told him that my goal was not to create dependence on me. My goal was to help the company build stronger leaders who could continue improving long after I was gone. Michael smiled because he understood that philosophy. Real success is not about becoming the person everyone needs forever. It is about helping others become capable of creating success themselves. At home, Emily and I continued discovering new things about each other. Our marriage had changed because we were no longer trying to measure who had achieved more. We had learned that two people could have different strengths and still support the same future. Emily told me that she often thought about the day she laughed when I lost my job. She said she regretted seeing that moment as a weakness instead of understanding it as a transition. I told her that everyone has moments where they misunderstand a situation. The important thing is whether they are willing to change when they learn more. She asked me if I ever wanted to remind her of that day or make her feel responsible for what happened. I told her no. I explained that holding on to resentment would only keep us connected to the past. I cared more about the relationship we were creating now. That answer meant more to her than any argument I could have made. She realized that the person she once underestimated was also the person who had the greatest reason to hold on to disappointment, yet chose understanding instead. A few weeks later, Michael asked me to join another major initiative within the company. This time, I walked into the meeting room differently. I was no longer wondering whether I belonged there. I knew my experience had value. I knew my perspective mattered. Most importantly, I knew that my identity was never tied to a job title. The day I lost my job felt like a door closing, but it became the moment that opened a completely different path. I learned that people may judge your situation before they understand your story. They may only see what changed on the surface and miss everything that remains underneath. But if you continue moving forward with patience and purpose, the truth eventually has a way of becoming visible. The more time I spent working with Michael Reynolds and his team, the more I understood that the biggest changes in life often happen quietly. There was no single moment when everything suddenly became perfect. Instead, there were small moments of growth, better conversations, and new understanding that slowly changed the direction of my life. The same was true for my relationship with Emily. We did not fix everything with one conversation. We rebuilt our connection by being honest with each other every day. One evening, Emily and I sat together in our backyard, something we had not done in a long time. The world around us was calm, and for the first time in months, we were not discussing work, deadlines, or expectations. We were simply talking as two people who had learned something important about each other. Emily looked at me and admitted that she had spent years believing success was something you could measure from the outside. She thought a person's career title, income, and reputation showed their true value. She said losing my job challenged that belief because she saw how quickly those things could change. But she also saw that my character, knowledge, and determination remained the same. I listened carefully because I knew that realization was meaningful. I did not need her to feel guilty forever. I needed her to understand that support matters most during uncertain moments. Emily told me she regretted the way she reacted when I came home with my belongings. She said she should have asked how I felt instead of immediately assuming I had failed. She should have reminded me of everything I had accomplished instead of focusing only on what had disappeared. I appreciated her honesty because apologies are not always easy, especially when they require someone to admit that they misunderstood another person. I told her that I also learned something from that experience. I learned that even people who love us can sometimes see only a small part of our story. They can make assumptions based on one difficult moment without knowing the years of effort behind it. But that does not mean we should allow those assumptions to define us. Around the same time, Michael invited me to participate in a company event where leaders discussed the future of the organization. Before the event began, he introduced me to several employees who had heard about the improvements happening within the company. Some of them thanked me for helping create a better working environment. I told them that the credit belonged to everyone involved. A company does not improve because of one person. It improves when people choose to listen, learn, and work together. Standing there, I thought about the difference between the man I was on the day I lost my job and the man I had become. I had started that journey believing I needed to prove something to everyone who doubted me. But over time, I realized the real challenge was proving something to myself. I needed to remember that my value existed before anyone recognized it. Later that night, Emily told me she was proud of the way I handled everything. She said she expected me to become bitter after what happened, but instead, I became more patient and understanding. I told her that bitterness would only keep me connected to the worst part of the experience. Choosing growth allowed me to move forward. The most important lesson was not about a company needing my knowledge or a signature representing years of experience. It was about understanding that people are more than the positions they hold. A job can change. Circumstances can change. Opinions can change. But the values a person carries with them remain. And sometimes, the hardest moments are the ones that reveal who we truly are. Looking back at everything that happened, I realized the day I lost my job was not the day my life fell apart. It was the day my perspective began to change. At the time, I thought I was losing the career I had spent 15 years building. I thought I was losing the confidence that came from knowing exactly where I belonged. I thought I was losing the respect of the people around me. But what I discovered was something much more important. I was never defined by a position, a company, or a title. I was defined by the knowledge, values, and character I carried with me wherever I went. Months after everything changed, my life looked completely different. I continued working with Michael Reynolds and his team as an advisor, helping the company improve its operations and prepare for future challenges. The work was meaningful because I was no longer chasing recognition. I was focused on creating something valuable and helping others succeed. Michael often reminded me that the best leaders were not always the people who demanded attention. They were the people who created opportunities for others to grow. That lesson stayed with me because it reflected everything I believed about success. At home, Emily and I also continued building a stronger relationship. We had learned that understanding someone requires more than seeing the results of their work. It requires seeing the effort, the struggles, and the decisions that happen when nobody is watching. Emily became more interested in my experiences, not because other people recognized my abilities, but because she genuinely wanted to understand my journey. One evening, she asked me if I ever wished I could go back and change the moment when I lost my job. I thought about it carefully before answering. I told her that if I changed that moment, I might never have discovered the opportunities that came afterward. I might never have learned how much confidence I could build without depending on a job title. I might never have understood that my value was something I carried inside myself, not something given to me by an employer. Emily smiled and said that was the part she respected most about me. She said many people would have allowed that experience to make them angry, but I chose to use it as a reason to grow. I told her that I was not perfect. There were moments when I felt disappointed and uncertain. But every difficult experience gives us a choice. We can allow it to define us, or we can allow it to teach us. A year after that unexpected phone call from Michael, I attended another company event. This time, I was not there as someone trying to prove his importance. I was there as someone who understood his own purpose. I looked around the room and saw employees, leaders, and people working together toward a common goal. I realized that the greatest achievement was not that a successful company needed my signature. The greatest achievement was that I had learned my worth before anyone else had to confirm it. When I think about that difficult day now, I no longer remember it as the moment I lost my job. I remember it as the moment I discovered a new direction. Life does not always give us the outcomes we expect. Sometimes it removes something familiar and replaces it with something better. Sometimes the people closest to us need time to understand our story. And sometimes, the person who needs to believe in us first is ourselves. My journey taught me that success is not measured only by where you stand when everything is going well. It is measured by how you continue moving forward when everything changes. The job was gone, but my purpose remained. The title disappeared, but my value stayed. And in the end, that was the truth I had been carrying all along.